The night was unusually cold for early October, with a biting wind that sliced through the quiet suburban streets of Maplewood. Most residents had already retreated to their homes, curtains drawn and lights dimmed. But in one corner of the town, chaos erupted as thick plumes of smoke spiraled into the dark sky. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the neighborhood was engulfed in flames, its windows shattering from the heat like tiny explosions. Red and blue lights flashed across the scene as police cars screeched to a halt nearby. Fire trucks followed close behind, their sirens wailing against the eerie silence of the night. Officer Mark Reynolds stepped out of his patrol car, his hand instinctively resting on the holster of his gun. He scanned the area quickly, his eyes narrowing as he spotted someone standing near the burning building. A lone figure stood motionless, silhouetted by the flickering orange glow of the fire. The man's face was unreadable, partially hidden by shadows, but his posture suggested something odd: calmness instead of panic or fear. His hands hung loosely at his sides, and there was no sign of him trying to flee. Mark gestured to his partner, Officer Lisa Carter, who nodded sharply before moving toward the mysterious individual. "Stay where you are," she called out firmly, her voice cutting through the crackling sounds of the inferno. The man didn't move, almost as if he hadn't heard her. As they approached cautiously, Mark noticed details about the stranger that made him uneasy. The man wore dark clothing smeared with soot, and his boots were caked with ash. In his right hand, he held what appeared to be a small gas canister, a damning piece of evidence under the circumstances. "Drop it," Mark barked, drawing his weapon. "Now." The man complied without hesitation, letting the canister fall to the ground with a dull thud. Still, he said nothing, his expression unreadable even as the officers closed in. Lisa took charge, snapping handcuffs onto the man's wrists while reciting his rights. "You're under arrest for suspicion of arson," she stated clearly, though her tone carried a hint of uncertainty. Something about this situation felt off. Why wasn't he resisting? Why hadn't he run when he had the chance? It wasn't until they turned him around to escort him to the squad car that Mark got a good look at his face. The man was black, his features sharp but weary, as if carrying some invisible burden. His eyes locked briefly with Mark's, not defiant or angry, just tired. For reasons he couldn't explain, Mark felt a pang of unease. There was something familiar about this man, though he couldn't quite place it. Back at the station, the man remained silent during questioning. He gave his name, Marcus Johnson, but refused to answer any other questions. His stoic demeanor only deepened the mystery surrounding him. Meanwhile, preliminary reports confirmed traces of accelerant at the scene, further implicating Marcus as the prime suspect. News of the arrest spread quickly throughout the department. Some officers whispered among themselves, speculating about Marcus's motives. Others dismissed him outright as just another criminal caught red-handed. Yet, amidst all the chatter, no one seemed to recognize him, or perhaps they simply didn't want to see beyond the accusations. What none of them realized yet was that Marcus wasn't just any ordinary suspect. And as dawn broke over Maplewood, casting long shadows over the precinct, the truth about who Marcus really was would soon begin to unravel, forcing everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths not just about him, but about themselves. The morning sun cast a pale light over the Maplewood Police Department, but inside the precinct, tensions were running high. Marcus Johnson sat in an interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. His head was bowed slightly, his eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the metal desk. He hadn't spoken since his arrest, and his silence only fueled the growing unease. Among the officers in another part of the building, Officer Mark Reynolds leaned back in his chair, staring at the file spread out before him. It contained everything they had gathered so far: photos of the burning warehouse, the gas canister found near Marcus, and witness statements from neighbors who claimed to have seen a suspicious man lurking around the area earlier that evening. Yet something about the case gnawed at Mark. Something felt incomplete. Lisa Carter joined him, holding a fresh cup of coffee. She set it down on his desk with a soft clink. "Still nothing?" she asked, glancing toward the closed door of the interrogation room. Mark shook his head. "Not a word." "You'd think he'd at least try to explain himself." Lisa crossed her arms, frowning. "Maybe he knows we've got enough evidence against him. That gas canister alone is pretty damning." "Yeah," Mark muttered, though his tone suggested doubt. "But why wouldn't he run? Why stand there like he was waiting for us?" Before Lisa could respond, Sergeant Harris approached them, his face grim. "We've got a call from the fire department," he said. They want to know if we've identified the suspect yet. Apparently, this isn't the first suspicious fire in the area lately. Mark raised an eyebrow. Arson spree? Harris nodded. 3 other fires in the past month. All abandoned buildings, just like this one. No leads until now. Lisa frowned. So we might be looking at a serial arsonist? It's possible, Harris replied. But I don't like how clean this feels. Too convenient. Like someone wanted us to catch him. Mark's stomach tightened. That thought had crossed his mind too. If Marcus really was behind the fires, why make it so easy for them to find him? And then there was the matter of his silence. Why wasn't he fighting back? Meanwhile, across town, news of the arrest reached the Maplewood Fire Station. Captain Rachel Monroe, a seasoned firefighter with 2 decades of service under her belt, stood frozen in front of the television screen in the station's break room. Her heart sank as the reporter described the suspect, a black man named Marcus Johnson, believed to be responsible for setting multiple fires in the Maplewood area. Rachel's knees nearly buckled. She recognized the name immediately, and not because she'd seen it in the news before. Marcus Johnson wasn't just any name to her. He was one of her own, a dedicated firefighter who had served on her team for years. No, she whispered, shaking her head. This has to be a mistake. She turned to her crew, most of whom were seated around the table eating breakfast. Their faces mirrored her shock as the reality of the situation sank in. Marcus wasn't just a colleague. He was family. They trusted him with their lives every time they responded to a call. Arson? It didn't make sense. Rachel grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic began to rise in her chest. What if something terrible had happened to him? Or worse, what if he really was involved in these fires? She couldn't believe it, not for a second. But the evidence seemed undeniable. Determined to get answers, Rachel called the police station. After several minutes of navigating automated menus and speaking to indifferent receptionists, she finally managed to reach someone who could help, Officer Lisa Carter. Listen, Rachel said firmly when Lisa answered, I need to speak to Marcus Johnson. He works for me. He's a firefighter. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A firefighter? Lisa repeated, sounding surprised. Yes, Rachel snapped, frustration bubbling over. And whatever you think you know about him, you're wrong. Marcus would never do something like this. Lisa hesitated. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we have evidence placing him at the scene. We can't ignore that. I'm not asking you to ignore anything, Rachel shot back. I'm telling you that you've made a mistake. Let me talk to him, please. After a moment of deliberation, Lisa agreed. All right, come down to the station. But I can't promise anything. When Rachel arrived at the precinct, her heart pounded wildly in her chest. She was escorted to the observation room adjacent to the interrogation room, where she could watch Marcus through a one-way mirror. Seeing him sitting there, his shoulders slumped, his expression unreadable, broke her heart. This wasn't the confident, dependable man she knew. Something was very, very wrong. What's going on here? Rachel demanded, turning to Lisa. Why hasn't he said anything? Lisa sighed. We were hoping you could tell us. Do you know why he'd be connected to those fires? Rachel shook her head. No, but I do know Marcus. He's saved lives, not destroyed them. There's more to this story than what you're seeing. As Rachel stared at Marcus through the glass, she vowed to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Because if Marcus wasn't guilty, then someone else had gone to great lengths to frame him, and that meant danger still lurked in the shadows of Maplewood. Rachel Monroe stood in the observation room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. As she watched Marcus through the one-way mirror, her mind raced with questions. Why was he silent? Why had he been at the warehouse that night? And most importantly, who could have set him up? She clenched her fists, determined not to let anger cloud her judgment. If Marcus wasn't guilty and Rachel refused to believe he was, it meant someone else was pulling the strings. Officer Lisa Carter leaned against the wall beside Rachel, observing her carefully. You seem pretty sure of his innocence, Lisa said after a moment, breaking the tense silence. I am, Rachel replied without hesitation. Marcus is one of the best firefighters I've ever worked with. He doesn't burn things, he puts them out. You don't know him like we do. Lisa nodded slowly, though skepticism lingered in her eyes. Look, I want to believe you, but we can't ignore the evidence. That gas canister, the soot on his clothes, it all points to him. Rachel turned to face Lisa, her expression firm but calm. Evidence can be planted. People can be framed. Have you even considered that possibility? Lisa hesitated. It was clear she hadn't fully entertained the idea. Framing someone for arson wasn't unheard of, especially if the real culprit wanted to throw investigators off their trail. Still, it felt like a stretch. "Do you have any proof?" Lisa asked finally. "Not yet," Rachel admitted, "but I'm willing to find it. Let me talk to him. Maybe he'll open up to me." Lisa exchanged a glance with Mark, who had entered the room unnoticed. After a brief pause, she relented. "Fine, but we'll stay nearby in case he tries anything." Moments later, Rachel stepped into the interrogation room. Marcus looked up as the door opened, and for the first time since his arrest, his expression shifted. Relief washed over his face when he saw Rachel, though it quickly gave way to shame. "Captain," he murmured, his voice hoarse from hours of silence, "I didn't think anyone would come." Rachel pulled out a chair and sat across from him, ignoring the handcuffs binding his wrists to the table. "Of course I came, Marcus. What's going on? Why are you here?" Marcus hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table again. For a moment, Rachel thought he might clam up once more. But then he sighed deeply and began to speak. "I didn't start the fire," he said quietly. "But I was there. I went to check it out because I smelled smoke while driving home. By the time I got there, the building was already burning. I tried to put it out, but it was too late." Rachel frowned. "Then why didn't you call it in? Why didn't you say something earlier?" Marcus shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "Because I knew no one would believe me. When the cops showed up, they saw me standing there with this." He gestured toward the gas canister sitting on the counter in the evidence bag. "It wasn't mine. Someone must have left it there to make it look like I did it." Rachel studied him closely, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was honesty and fear. "Do you have any idea who would want to frame you?" she asked gently. Marcus hesitated again, clearly struggling with whether or not to share what he knew. Finally, he spoke. "There's been talk around town about some people wanting those old buildings torn down. Developers keep trying to buy them, but the owners won't sell. A few weeks ago, someone mentioned using creative methods to get rid of them. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now." Rachel's eyes widened. "You think someone's setting these fires deliberately to force the owners to sell? It makes sense, doesn't it?" Marcus said bitterly. "And whoever it is, they picked me as their scapegoat." Rachel stood up abruptly, her mind racing. This changed everything. If Marcus was telling the truth, then the arson spree wasn't random, it was calculated. And the person behind it was clever enough to leave false evidence at the scene to implicate an innocent man. Before she could respond, Lisa and Mark entered the room. "We need to hear this," Lisa said firmly, nodding toward Marcus, reluctantly. Marcus repeated his story for the officers. As he spoke, Rachel noticed subtle changes in their expressions. Doubt began to creep in, replacing the certainty they'd carried earlier. By the time Marcus finished, even Mark seemed less convinced of his guilt. "We'll look into it," Lisa promised, though her tone suggested caution. "But until we find concrete proof, we can't release him." Rachel nodded, understanding the limitations of their investigation. Still, she vowed silently to dig deeper. Someone out there had gone to great lengths to destroy Marcus's reputation, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. As she left the precinct, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay hidden somewhere in the ashes of the burned buildings. All she had to do was follow the trail. Rachel Monroe returned to the fire station with a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together in her mind, but she needed more evidence that could exonerate Marcus and expose whoever was behind the arson spree. She knew time was running out. The longer Marcus stayed in custody, the harder it would be to clear his name. As soon as she walked into the station, Rachel called an emergency meeting with her team. Firefighters gathered around the large wooden table in the briefing room, their faces reflecting a mix of confusion and concern. Rachel wasted no time getting to the point. "Marcus has been framed," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "He didn't start those fires, but someone wants us to think he did. We need to figure out who's behind this, and fast." The room fell silent as the gravity of her words sank in. One of the younger firefighters, Danny, spoke up first. "But why would anyone target Marcus? He's one of the most respected guys on the team." "That's exactly why," Rachel replied. "Whoever is doing this knows how much we trust him. Framing him throws suspicion onto the entire department. It's a distraction, a way to keep us from finding the real culprit." Another firefighter, Elena, leaned forward thoughtfully. "What about what Marcus said earlier about developers wanting those buildings torn down. Do we have any leads on who might benefit from these fires? Rachel nodded. That's where we start. I want everyone to dig into recent property records for those burned buildings. Find out who owns them, who's tried to buy them, and if there are any connections between the owners and local developers. The team sprang into action, splitting tasks among themselves. Rachel took charge of reviewing old news articles and public records related to disputes over abandoned properties in Maplewood. Hours passed as they sifted through documents, piecing together fragments of information. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Late that evening, Elena approached Rachel with a stack of papers in hand. I think I found something, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. 3 of the 4 burned buildings were owned by the same family, the Carters. They've refused multiple offers from a development company called Crestview Holdings to sell the properties. Rachel frowned. Crestview Holdings. That name sounds familiar. Elena nodded. They're pretty big around here. They've been involved in several high-profile projects, including the new shopping mall downtown. But get this, they also filed lawsuits against the Carter family last year, claiming the buildings were unsafe and should be demolished. Rachel's pulse quickened. This was the kind of motive they'd been looking for. If Crestview couldn't buy the properties legally, maybe they'd resorted to illegal methods to force the Carters' hand. Arson would certainly fit that bill. Good work, Rachel said, taking the papers from Elena. Now we just need to connect Crestview to the fires directly. While the team continued their research, Rachel decided to pay a visit to the Carter family. She drove to a modest house on the outskirts of town, where an elderly woman named Margaret Carter greeted her at the door. Margaret's eyes lit up when Rachel introduced herself as a firefighter investigating the recent fires. I don't understand why anyone would burn down those old buildings, Margaret said, shaking her head sadly. They're not worth much, but they're part of our family history. My grandfather built 2 of them himself. Rachel listened intently, jotting down notes. Has anyone pressured you to sell recently? Maybe threatened you? Margaret hesitated before nodding slowly. There was a man. He came by a few months ago, saying he represented Crestview Holdings. He offered us a lot of money, but when we said no, he got angry, told us we were making a mistake. Rachel's heart raced. Do you remember his name? Not exactly, Margaret admitted, but he left a business card. I kept it in case I ever needed to contact him again. Margaret disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later holding a crumpled card. Rachel took it carefully, her eyes widening as she read the name printed on it. Gregory Lane, Project Manager, Crestview Holdings. This is it, Rachel whispered to herself. This could be the break we've been waiting for. Back at the station, Rachel shared her findings with the team. We need to look into Gregory Lane, she said. Find out everything you can about him, his background, his ties to Crestview, and whether he's been linked to suspicious activity before. Danny raised his hand hesitantly. Shouldn't we tell the police about this? They're the ones handling the investigation. We will, Rachel replied firmly, but right now, we need solid proof. Until then, they won't take us seriously. Let's make sure we have everything lined up before we go to them. The team agreed, doubling down on their efforts. As the night wore on, Rachel couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They were closing in on the truth, and once they exposed Gregory Lane's involvement, Marcus would finally be free. But deep down, Rachel knew the hardest part was yet to come. Proving Lane's guilt wouldn't be easy, especially if he had powerful allies backing him. Still, she refused to back down. For Marcus, for her team, and for justice, she was ready to fight. The next morning, Rachel Monroe arrived at the fire station earlier than usual, her mind buzzing with plans. Armed with the business card bearing Gregory Lane's name and the mounting evidence linking Crestview Holdings to the suspicious fires, she felt a surge of determination. But she also knew that proving Lane's involvement wouldn't be straightforward. Powerful corporations like Crestview had resources and connections that could bury inconvenient truths. Rachel gathered her team once again, laying out the new information on the table. We've got a lead, she said, holding up the crumpled business card. Gregory Lane is our guy, or at least, he's tied to this mess. Now we need to figure out how deep his involvement goes. Elena nodded, already pulling up her laptop. I'll dig into his background. Social media profiles, financial records, anything public. Danny chimed in, eager to contribute. What about surveillance footage? If Lane visited those buildings before the fires, maybe someone caught him on camera. Rachel smiled faintly. Her team was sharp, and their energy gave her hope. Good thinking. Start by checking security cameras near the burned sites. And don't forget to look for private cameras homeowners or businesses might have recorded something useful. As the team dispersed to tackle their tasks, Rachel decided it was time to involve the police. She called Officer Lisa Carter, explaining what they'd uncovered so far. To her relief, Lisa sounded open to hearing them out. "Bring what you've got," Lisa said. "If there's even a chance Marcus isn't guilty, we need to follow every lead." An hour later, Rachel stood in the precinct's conference room, surrounded by officers who listened intently as she laid out the case against Crestview Holdings. She presented Margaret Carter's testimony, the business card, and the pattern of attempted buyouts followed by arson. By the end of her presentation, even Sergeant Harris seemed intrigued. "This is solid groundwork," Harris admitted. "But we still need concrete proof tying Lane to the fires. Without that, it's all circumstantial." Rachel nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. "That's why we're working on gathering more evidence. Surveillance footage, witness statements, we're covering all angles." Harris agreed to assign a detective to assist with the investigation, giving Rachel access to additional resources. For the first time since Marcus's arrest, it felt like real progress was being made. Meanwhile, Elena made a breakthrough while combing through online databases. She discovered that Gregory Lane had previously worked for another development firm accused of unethical practices, including bribery and illegal demolition tactics. Though no charges had stuck back then, the allegations painted a troubling picture. "Lane's got a history of cutting corners," Elena told Rachel excitedly. "And guess what else? His LinkedIn profile lists project management experience spanning over 20 years, but one of his references is listed as an alias. I cross-checked it, and it belongs to someone completely unrelated to real estate." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Sounds like he's hiding something. Keep digging into his past jobs and associates. There might be more dirt buried there." At the same time, Danny reviewed hours of grainy surveillance footage from cameras near the burned buildings. Just when he thought he'd hit a dead end, he spotted something odd: a black sedan parked outside one of the warehouses days before the fire. The car returned on the night of the blaze, lingering briefly before speeding away. "I think I found our vehicle," Danny announced, pointing to the screen. "It matches descriptions from other witnesses near the scenes." Rachel leaned closer, studying the image. While the driver's face was obscured, the license plate was partially visible. "Run the plates," she instructed. "Let's see if it leads us to Lane or whoever else is involved." As the day wore on, tensions rose within Crestview Holdings' sleek corporate offices. Unbeknownst to Rachel and her team, Gregory Lane had grown increasingly paranoid. Word of Margaret Carter's cooperation with firefighters had reached him, along with rumors of renewed police interest in the fires. He paced his office, clutching his phone tightly. "We need to shut this down," Lane muttered to himself. "Before it gets out of control." He dialed a number on his encrypted phone, speaking in hushed tones. Whoever was on the other end listened silently before responding curtly. Within minutes, orders were given to erase digital footprints, destroy incriminating documents, and ensure key players stayed silent. Back at the station, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Every piece of evidence they uncovered brought them closer to exposing the truth, but it also pushed their opponents further into defensive mode. Whoever was orchestrators within Crestview Holdings had started panicking too. An assistant in the accounting department noticed unusual activity in company expense reports, including large sums funneled to untraceable accounts. Fearing retaliation, she quietly copied the files onto a USB drive and slipped it into her bag. Planning to hand it over to authorities, Rachel's instincts told her they were closing in. But as night fell over Maplewood, she realized the stakes were higher than ever. Exposing Gregory Lane wouldn't just free Marcus, it would dismantle a web of corruption stretching far beyond arson. And in doing so, it would put everyone involved squarely in the crosshairs of danger. The air in the fire station was thick with tension as Rachel Monroe and her team worked tirelessly to piece together the final puzzle. Every new discovery brought them closer to exposing Gregory Lane and his connection to Crestview Holdings, but it also heightened the risks. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every phone call, every email, every movement felt like it might be under scrutiny. Still, she refused to let fear slow her down. Elena had made another breakthrough late that evening. After hours of poring over financial records, she found a series of suspicious payments labeled as consulting fees sent from Crestview Holdings to an offshore account. What caught her attention was the timing. The transfers coincided perfectly with the dates of the fires. "This isn't just arson," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's organized crime. They're using these fires to intimidate property owners and clear the way for their projects." Rachel nodded grimly. "And if we don't stop them, they'll keep doing it, maybe even escalate." Danny, meanwhile, had traced the partial license plate from the black sedan to a rental company. The car had been rented under a fake name, but further digging revealed that the credit card used for the transaction belonged to none other than Gregory Lane himself. It was the smoking gun they'd been searching for, or at least part of it. "We've got him," Danny said, slamming his fist lightly on the table in triumph. This ties Lane directly to the scene of one of the fires, but Rachel knew better than to celebrate too soon. Evidence alone wasn't enough. They needed to build an airtight case before confronting Lane or going public. She decided it was time to bring all their findings to the police and push for action. The next morning, Rachel met with officers Lisa Carter and Mark Reynolds at the precinct. Alongside them sat Detective Alvarez, a seasoned investigator assigned to assist with the case. Together, they reviewed everything: Margaret Carter's testimony, the business card, the surveillance footage, the financial records, and now the rented sedan linked to Lane. Detective Alvarez whistled softly. "You've done some impressive work here, but we need to move carefully. If Lane realizes we're onto him, he'll destroy any remaining evidence or worse." Lisa nodded in agreement. "He's right. We'll need warrants to search Crestview's offices and seize documents. And we should consider bringing in forensic accountants to analyze those offshore transactions." Rachel leaned forward, her expression resolute. "Do whatever you need to do. Just make sure Marcus gets cleared. He's innocent, and he deserves justice." With renewed urgency, the officers sprang into action. Warrants were issued, and plans were set in motion to raid Crestview Holdings headquarters. Meanwhile, Rachel returned to the fire station to ensure her team stayed safe while continuing their own investigation. Unbeknownst to them, Gregory Lane was growing increasingly desperate. His encrypted phone buzzed constantly with updates from his network of informants. When word reached him about the warrant preparations, panic set in. He called an emergency meeting with his inner circle, a shadowy group of executives and enforcers who operated behind the scenes. "We can't let this go any further," Lane hissed, pacing back and forth in a dimly lit conference room. "If they find the files, we're finished." One of the executives, a cold-eyed woman named Sandra, spoke up. "Then we eliminate the problem, silence the whistleblowers, destroy the evidence, and discredit anyone involved." Lane hesitated, knowing what such drastic measures entailed, but desperation clouded his judgment. "Do it," he ordered finally. "Make sure no one talks." Sandra smiled faintly and left the room, already dialing numbers to carry out the plan. Back at the fire station, Rachel received an unexpected visitor, the assistant from Crestview Holdings who had copied the incriminating expense reports. Shaking visibly, the young woman handed over the USB drive containing the files. "I didn't know who else to trust," she whispered. "They'll come after me if they find out I gave this to you." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing. We'll protect you and use this to take them down." As the assistant hurried away, Rachel plugged the USB drive into her computer. What she found inside confirmed everything they suspected: detailed logs of illegal payments, communications between Lane and his accomplices, and even blueprints outlining which properties were targeted next. "This is it," Rachel murmured, her heart pounding. "This is how we expose them." But as she stared at the screen, a chilling thought crossed her mind. If Crestview was willing to frame Marcus and torch buildings, what lengths would they go to in order to protect themselves now? The answer scared her, but it also strengthened her resolve. Justice was within reach, but the battle ahead would be dangerous for Marcus, for the truth, and for everyone affected by Crestview's greed. Rachel knew there was no turning back. The raid on Crestview Holdings headquarters unfolded like a scene from a movie, with police officers storming the building just as dawn broke over Maplewood. Armed with warrants, they seized computers, files, and financial records while Gregory Lane watched helplessly, his face pale and drawn. For the first time in years, he looked like a man who had run out of options. Inside the fire station, Rachel Monroe waited anxiously for news. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a mug of coffee, her mind replaying every step of the investigation. She knew this was the moment of truth, the culmination of days spent chasing shadows and piecing together fragments of evidence. If everything went according to plan, Marcus would finally be free. Hours later, Detective Alvarez called Rachel with an update. "We've got him," he said firmly. Lane cracked under questioning. He admitted to orchestrating the fires, but claims he only authorized pressure tactics. He's blaming everyone else for escalating things. Rachel exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. "What about Marcus?" "He'll be released soon," Alvarez replied. "Once we present the full case, including the whistleblower's files, it'll be clear he was framed." When Marcus walked out of the precinct later that day, flanked by Rachel and his fellow firefighters, the weight of the past week seemed to lift visibly from his shoulders. The sun shone brightly above them, casting long shadows across the parking lot. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus smiled a genuine, heartfelt expression of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion as he turned to Rachel. "You didn't give up on me, your family," Rachel replied simply, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We don't leave each other behind." As the team celebrated quietly, news of Crestview Holdings' downfall spread quickly through Maplewood. Local media outlets picked up the story, exposing the company's illegal practices and shedding light on the corruption that had plagued the town for years. Residents expressed outrage, demanding accountability not just from Lane but from anyone else involved. Gregory Lane wasn't the only one facing consequences. Several executives within Crestview were arrested, and investigations expanded to uncover additional crimes tied to the corporation. Margaret Carter and other property owners received apologies and compensation from city officials eager to make amends. In the weeks that followed, life began to return to normal, or as close to normal as possible. Marcus returned to work at the fire station, greeted with cheers and applause from his colleagues. Though the ordeal had left scars, both visible and invisible, he found solace in knowing he had people who believed in him when no one else did. For Rachel, the experience reinforced her belief in justice and the power of teamwork. She gathered her crew once more, this time not for strategy sessions but for reflection. "We stood together," Rachel said, addressing her team. "And because of that, we uncovered the truth. But let's not forget why this happened. Developers like Crestview thought they could exploit our community. We can't let that happen again." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present. They vowed to remain vigilant, ensuring that Maplewood wouldn't fall victim to greed and corruption ever again. One evening, as Rachel sat alone in her office reviewing the final reports, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Marcus, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her with a sheepish grin. "Thought you might need this," he said. "You've earned it." Rachel accepted the cup gratefully, smiling back. "So have you. How are you holding up?" Marcus sighed, leaning against the doorway. "Better. Still trying to process everything. But I couldn't have done it without you, all of you." Rachel nodded, her gaze softening. "You do the same for any of us. That's what makes us strong." As they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee, Rachel allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The fight had been hard-won, but it reminded her of something important. Even in the darkest times, hope could shine through if people came together. Outside, the streets of Maplewood bustled with renewed energy. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, children played in parks, and businesses reopened their doors. Life moved forward, but the lessons learned during those turbulent days lingered, etched into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the courage of those who refused to stay silent. Justice had prevailed, but more importantly, trust had been restored, not just in the system, but in humanity itself. And in that quiet triumph, Rachel found her greatest reward.